From the crowded backstreets of Dublin to the glitzy villas of Marbella, one crime family rose from obscurity and rewrote the playbook of organized crime. Their name would echo far beyond Ireland, whispered in the same breath as Italy's Camorra, Mexico's Los Zetas, Japan's Yakuza, and Russia's feared thieves-in-law. This was no ordinary gang of street thugs. This was a cartel that grew into one of the most powerful and globally recognized crime empires of the 21st century. At the heart of it all stood Daniel Kinahan, a man with two faces. To some, he was a power broker in international boxing, shaking hands with champions under the bright lights of sold-out arenas. To others, he was the architect of a bloody underworld feud that left a trail of bodies scattered across Europe. Nearly 20 lives would be claimed in a storm of vengeance, greed, and betrayal. But to understand Daniel's rise, you have to start with his father, Christopher Kinahan, the man who built the foundations of an empire. In the 1990s, Dublin was changing. The city's youth were increasingly exposed to a flood of drugs. And into this market stepped Christopher. He wasn't just another dealer. He was organized, calculating, and ambitious. He began supplying drugs to Dublin's younger generation, quickly building a reputation as a figure not to be crossed. His early operations may have been local, but Christopher was already thinking bigger. By the early 2000s, however, the very ambition that fueled his rise also fractured his network. His gang splintered, and when gangs split in Dublin, blood usually followed. A violent feud erupted that left around a dozen men dead, a grim reminder of the stakes in this ruthless world. But Christopher was not a man easily shaken. In 2001, after a stint in prison, he emerged with renewed determination. Rather than simply return to the old ways, he reinvented himself. He began studying Spanish and Dutch, languages that would prove invaluable in the world of international drug trafficking. He understood that to survive, he needed to escape Dublin's endless cycle of feuds and step onto a larger stage. That stage was southern Spain. Marbella and the Costa del Sol were already havens for expatriates, tourists, and most importantly, smugglers who moved massive quantities of cocaine across Europe. For Christopher, relocating there wasn't just about avoiding old rivals. It was about positioning himself at the very center of Europe's wholesale drug market. In Dublin, he left the day-to-day operations in the capable and brutal hands of Freddie Thompson. Delegating power was risky, but it was also necessary. While Christopher built connections in Spain, Thompson ensured that the Kinahan influence in Ireland only grew stronger. The strategy worked. What began as a Dublin gang evolved into a European powerhouse. Christopher carefully expanded his network, transforming it into one of the continent's most efficient distributors of narcotics. Thompson's grip on the Irish streets gave the cartel a firm base, while Christopher's European connections unlocked unimaginable profits. But such growth always comes with enemies. In 2008, Christopher himself became a target and was forced to flee. Leadership in Dublin shifted to his cousin, Liam Byrne, whose group would eventually be branded by Irish authorities as the Byrne Organized Crime Group. The international spotlight was closing in. In 2010, Spanish authorities launched Operation Shovel, a sweeping investigation designed to dismantle the Kinahan empire. Raids were carried out, arrests were made, and for a moment, it looked as if the Kinahans might finally fall. But the operation collapsed. Prosecutors couldn't assemble enough evidence to secure convictions, and whispers of corruption within the Spanish police further tainted the case. To the outside world, the Kinahans appeared untouchable. Even in the face of international law enforcement, their empire not only survived, it thrived. Their wealth was staggering, their reach global, and their investments spanned legitimate and shadow industries alike. It was during this time that Daniel Kinahan began to emerge as more than just the heir to his father's empire. The organization was generating over €1 billion, and Daniel was increasingly seen as the man shaping its future. Charismatic and sharp, he possessed the business instincts that allowed him to straddle two very different worlds: the ruthless violence of the underworld and the polished glamour of professional sports. In 2012, Daniel co-founded MGM Boxing in Marbella, a venture that would later be rebranded as MTK Global. On the surface, it was a legitimate enterprise, managing fighters and organizing events. But beneath the glossy exterior, many suspected it was also a clever way to launder money and cleanse Daniel's reputation. After all, what better disguise for a cartel leader than rubbing shoulders with world-class athletes and being photographed ringside at championship bouts? For Daniel, boxing was both a business and a shield. He didn't do it alone. His core circle remained loyal. Freddie Thompson continued to oversee criminal operations, while Gary Hutch, one of Daniel's most trusted lieutenants, played a vital role. For a time, it seemed the Kinahan machine was unstoppable. But empires rarely crumble from outside forces. More often, they rot from within, and that rot began with betrayal. The relationship between Daniel and Gary Hutch soured over money, as greed and mistrust drove a wedge between once loyal allies. Daniel believed Gary had crossed him, and in the world of organized crime, betrayal rarely goes unpunished. An attempted hit on Daniel left an innocent boxer shot, a chilling reminder of how blurred the lines between Daniel's two worlds had become. Gary fled, seeking protection from his uncle, Jerry the Monk Hutch, a legendary figure in Dublin's underworld. A deal was struck. For €200,000, Daniel would spare Gary's life. But trust was a currency long depleted between them. The truce shattered when Gary Hutch was executed in Marbella in 2015. For the Hutch family, this was not just a murder. It was an unforgivable declaration of war. Soon after, an attempt was made on Jerry Hutch's life in Lanzarote, but he narrowly escaped. The message was clear. The feud had begun. What followed was one of the bloodiest chapters in modern Irish crime history. In February 2016, the fragile boundary between the criminal world and the public sphere collapsed in spectacular fashion. During a crowded boxing weigh-in at the Regency Hotel in Dublin, gunmen disguised as police stormed the venue. Their target was Daniel Kinahan. Shots rang out, chaos erupted, and though Daniel escaped unharmed, his associate David Byrne wasn't as fortunate. Byrne's death was the spark that ignited an all-out war between the Kinahans and the Hutches. The violence spiraled almost immediately. Retaliation came in brutal form when the Hutch clan's brother, a taxi driver uninvolved in crime, was murdered. It was a message of escalation. Nobody was safe. Dublin descended into fear as the feud claimed victim after victim. Around 18 lives would be lost in a relentless cycle of hits and counter-hits. Daniel Kinahan was alleged to have personally ordered at least 14 assassinations. The cartel began hiring foreign hitmen, professionals from outside Ireland, including the notorious Estonian contract killer, Imre Arakas. Each killing tightened the grip of fear, not only in Dublin but across Europe. For the authorities, the feud created an unprecedented challenge. Gardaí responded with increased armed patrols, checkpoints, and round-the-clock surveillance. Dublin became a city living under siege, its streets patrolled like a war zone. Yet even as police cracked down, the killings continued. The Kinahan-Hutch feud wasn't just about vengeance. It was about power, dominance, and survival. By the mid-2000s, the Kinahan name had transformed into something far larger than a Dublin crime family. It was a global brand of fear and influence, a criminal enterprise whose reach spanned continents and whose leadership was as comfortable at a weigh-in press conference as it was ordering a hit from the shadows. And with Daniel Kinahan at the helm, the lines between the legitimate and the illicit would blur like never before. As Dublin's streets drowned in blood and fear, The Kinahans made a calculated decision. The Irish capital was no longer a safe base. Every move was monitored, every phone tapped, every ally under suspicion. With police pressure mounting and the Hutch feud spiraling out of control, the cartel shifted its center of gravity thousands of miles away, to the glittering city of Dubai. Dubai was more than a paradise of glass towers and desert wealth. For Daniel Kinahan and his lieutenants, it was sanctuary. The United Arab Emirates had no extradition treaty with Ireland, which meant the long reach of European justice ended at the Gulf's edge. From luxury apartments and lavish hotels, the Kinahans directed operations with the same precision as before, but now insulated by distance and fortified by the wealth they had amassed. But if the move gave them safety, it also put them under the harshest international spotlight yet. Newspapers splashed Daniel's name across front pages, labeling him the Irish narco baron in Dubai. European governments pledged joint operations. And back in Ireland, the crackdown was relentless. 79 people tied to the feud were arrested. Dozens more faced charges. Liam Byrne, Daniel's cousin and key ally, fled to Birmingham, trying to rebuild what was left of his network. Authorities seized millions. Supercars, designer jewelry, luxury homes stuffed with cash. The cartel may have been alive in Dubai, but in Ireland, the walls were closing in. In that vacuum, new predators emerged. On the streets of Dublin, the Gucci gang, led by the flamboyant figure known only as Mr. Flashy, began to rise. Supplied directly by the Kinahans, this young gang embraced a flashy lifestyle of expensive clothes, fast cars, and social media swagger. To many, they were the future face of organized crime in Ireland. A new generation raised under the shadow of the Kinahans. But as history had shown, ambition always comes with blood. Splits tore through the Gucci gang, and the feud turned inward. In 2022, James Whalen, one of its members, was murdered, sparking a new cycle of violence. Mr. Flashy himself narrowly survived an assassination attempt and now lives in hiding, his empire as fragile as it is flashy. Across the Irish Sea, the Kinahans' ambitions were far greater. Britain was the real prize, and in the United Kingdom, one man became Daniel's most trusted lieutenant, Thomas "Bomber" Kavanagh. Since the early 2000s, Bomber had overseen the cartel's expansion in Britain. Brutal, efficient, and feared, he turned the UK into a billion-euro market for Kinahan drugs. Alongside him was James Mulvey, another heavyweight in the underworld. But trust was a rare commodity in this business. Gerard and Paul Kavanagh, once insiders, fell out over money. Both were executed in cold blood. Mulvey himself grew paranoid, convinced Bomber might betray him. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. In 2019, a raid on Bomber's home revealed weapons, ammunition, and evidence linking him to large-scale shipments of drugs. By 2021, he stood in court facing charges that would finally strip him of his power. The evidence was overwhelming. 36 million euros worth of drugs proven, and investigators estimated the true total of his shipments at nearly 700 million euros. Bomber, once untouchable, was sentenced to a long prison term, a devastating blow to the cartel's UK command. But the Kinahans had spread their roots deep. In Liverpool, they had found another set of allies. Liam Cornett and Michael Rice became their representatives in the port city, running an operation that mirrored the county lines model. They flooded England with cocaine and heroin, stretching their influence across smaller towns and exploiting vulnerable youths to move product. The empire looked solid until one careless mistake shattered the illusion. A grenade exploded inside a house stocked with 1.6 million euros worth of drugs, drawing police attention. The operation unraveled. By 2019, both Cornett and Rice were behind bars, their network dismantled. What had begun as a Dublin gang was now a global cartel, But such reach could not escape the notice of the world's most powerful governments. The United States Department of Justice officially entered the war against the Kinahans. A $5 million bounty was placed on the heads of Daniel, his father Christopher, and his brother Christy Jr. Their assets across the globe were frozen, from bank accounts in Europe to properties in the United Arab Emirates. Investigators uncovered more than 200 front companies, trading in everything from textiles to food, used to launder billions. The Kinahans' empire of shadow money was being dismantled piece by piece. Even their jewel, MTK Global, could not survive. Daniel had long denied having control over the boxing company, but the evidence told a different story. The pressure became unbearable. Sponsors pulled out, partners severed ties, and by 2022, MTK Global collapsed. What had once been Daniel's cleverest disguise now became the evidence that condemned him in the eyes of the world. For boxing, the scandal was seismic. Daniel Kinahan had been advisor to Tyson Fury, one of the sport's greatest heavyweights. He had even brokered the deal for Fury to face Anthony Joshua in what was billed as the fight of the century. But behind the press conferences and the million-dollar contracts was a cartel boss wanted by international law enforcement. As sanctions piled up, the sport recoiled in shame. Promoters and fighters scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. The ties between organized crime and boxing had been exposed, and the fallout still lingers. Yet despite everything, raids, arrests, sanctions, the cartel refused to crumble. From Dubai, Daniel continued to pull strings. Authorities believe the Kinahans now operate with three clear priorities. Protect Daniel at all costs, secure their wealth hidden in offshore networks, and keep the drug trade alive. But whispers began to circulate of an informant within their inner circle. Christopher Kinahan Sr. himself was said to be investigating the betrayal. If true, it would mean the cartel faces not only pressure from outside forces, but also the rod of suspicion within. Meanwhile, in Dublin, the fear of violence never truly left. Authorities worry that as the cartel regroups, the bloodshed could return. Rival gangs, sensing weakness, are already circling. Among them, the Grundon brothers, leaders of a group known simply as the Family, are rising fast. Their dominance in Ireland grows each month, and some Garda officers now believe they could surpass the Kinahans locally. The cartel, unwilling to surrender its throne, has already dispatched senior emissaries from Dubai to reassert control. The underworld is bracing for yet another storm. The story of the Kinahan cartel is far from over. From Dublin to Dubai, London to Las Vegas, their shadow stretches across continents. They are hunted by the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, yet still command fear and respect in the criminal underworld. Will Daniel Kinahan end his days behind bars, or will he continue to outmaneuver justice, hiding behind the wealth and connections he has so carefully built? And with rivals closing in and whispers of betrayal growing louder, could the cartel one day collapse from within? What began as a local gang in Dublin has become a case study in how modern organized crime operates. Global, corporate, and almost impossible to eradicate. But history shows that even the most powerful crime empires eventually fall. The question is not if, but when. And as the Kinahans' empire trembles under the weight of global pursuit, one thing remains certain. The world is watching. If you found this story gripping and want to uncover more about the hidden empires of organized crime, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans, and join us as we continue to explore the dark corners of power, greed, and betrayal.